Alrighty, welcome. So this is our fall data meeting to start the 2023-2024 school year. And of course, we in these first couple of weeks have assessed our children in all sorts of different ways to get an idea of exactly where we are starting from in order to be able to make some decisions about several different things. First of all, especially because we are in a kindergarten classroom, some of those decisions include things like maybe we need to start in a different place because this child has never been to school before, right? Maybe they didn't go to preschool, maybe they weren't part of any sort of daycare program or things like that. So there are some things maybe we just need to start with pure exposure for some of our children. Then maybe there are some of the children that have been to preschool either here at Diamond Lake or in other locations who have had exposure but perhaps haven't had the same application like we do in kindergarten. Because of course in most of our preschool programs, and especially here, a lot of it is play-based and a lot of it is choice-based versus heavy academic-based. So the shift that we have going from pre-K to kindergarten is huge, right? So this benchmark data also helps us in that way. It also helps us when we're trying to identify language needs in terms of L1 and L2, depending on if we have a child who is part of the dual language program, if we have a child who's not part of the dual language program but does speak another language at home. It kind of allows us to put all these different puzzle pieces together. And it also allows us to compare when we screened these little loves back last spring, or even some of them that we did over the summer. Has there been growth since then? Or does it look a little bit different? Because when we did the screening, that was really kind of a one-on-one conversational, trying to kind of get an idea of where kids are, versus now let's take this big online assessment and answer some really hard questions and see how our students can do with multiple choice. So it also helps us, again, especially at the kindergarten level, to look at things and think about things from a cognitive level and a processing level, because the information is delivered so differently. The other big piece that it also helps us for all the time is looking at, are there students that we know right away from the beginning of the year are going to need some support and intervention? Because we know that sometimes it could just be exposure, or at other times there is more of a processing concern, and we might need those extra 30 minutes of either push in or pull out to be able to support our children in reading and or math. So our fantastic intervention team spent all day on Monday going through every single child in our building to be able to determine exactly who needs those services, why they might need them, looking at specific skills, and also looking at, do we have to have any sort of shift in terms of tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. We have a very small kindergarten class this year. It was small last year too. This one's a little bigger, but it's still small. So it's looking at, do we have sort of that barbell effect, which we've seen before, like there might be a good chunk of kids in tier 1, a good chunk of kids in tier 3, and then a few in the middle? Or is it heavier one way versus the other in comparison? So our intervention crew has put together this awesome data that they're gonna share. So I'm gonna have intervention share that first, and then I also wanna get some feedback from the kindergarten team, thinking about what does this mean for us overall as a grade level, and then what does it mean for each of your individual classrooms. Some of the needs might be exactly the same for every single student, right? And some of it might be very different depending on which classroom you go to. So let's start with intervention and the great data that they've put together for us today.
Okay, so this Google slideshow is linked in your agenda. If you want to follow along, you should all have access to it. And what we've done is we've just compiled all the information from the beginning of the year assessments to kind of take an overview of what it looks like in kindergarten this year, and then some specifics. So we, of course, have some graphs for you. But as we take a look at this data, we have some guiding questions we'd like you to be thinking about to help with our discussion. The first one, what trends do you see in the graphs? Does your tier 1 instruction need to shift based on the data? What tools and how often will you progress monitor your tier 2 students in the classroom? And how will we extend the learning for students who are already proficient? So and those are also typed in your agenda just to kind of facilitate our conversation today. So we're going to start with kindergarten. Your benchmark data, you all have access to this and are probably have already looked at it, I'm sure. But this is the data that these graphs came from. on this slide, we're looking at the kinder monolingual English sounds, if you can look at here.
So our big chunk there, the 15, had 0 sounds. And then 1 to 5 sounds, we had 7. And then you can see just little bits and pieces there.
So let me ask one question about this graph. 15 of the students, which based on what I'm seeing here, looks like half the children that were tested. If 50% have 0 letter sounds, is that sort of a red flag in a 911, or is this typical in comparison to what you've seen in the past?
It's very typical to my classroom last year.
Okay.
I remember I had 12 students, and 11 out of the 12 had 0 to 1 letter sounds. I
Sure.
had one that had like 14.
Okay.
So I think it's not as typical as it was years ago, but it's starting to be a trend, it looks like.
Yep.
Well, and I think we saw that trend start as soon as play-based learning took place in kindergarten or in pre-K, because we went from a kind of a slow academic shift in pre-K to solely play-based and them just meeting their needs as they were in that program. And so I think once we saw that shift, we saw our data shift. And so I think that this is pretty typical of what we've seen for the last few years based on that.
Okay. So do you feel as a team that you already have some strategies and lessons prepared to address the concerns? Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say, well, last year we started our ABC boot camp, and that was expose every child to the 26 letters, 1 letter each day, to give them kind of like a quick boot camp, as for to say, and then we've exposed them, we've talked about each letter, and then we can build from there. And it didn't take 2 to 3 months like it had in the past to talk about each letter and its letter sound. So we're doing a faster exposure, and then we can go ahead and review it.
And with the faster exposure, children are also picking up on it and mastering it faster.
And
Okay.
I was gonna say that last year, I remember mine was very in the red, and I was very concerned at the beginning of the year. And I'm gonna tell you, at the end of the year, I worked with Emily. I was like, they got it. It was I was so happy at the end of the year. I thought, because this was the first year I did the boot camp and the and the new phonics, and I was a little concerned. I didn't know if it was going to be successful, and I 100% thought it was wonderful. And you still have a few kids that they struggle still. It's just how it always is. It's hard. It's a hard concept for them. But how low my number was, to see the end result was very, very pleasant.
Well, and I think where we've
Great.
seen success is because this boot camp does connect to what they are learning in pre-K. So even though we say it's play-based, it's taking real world objects like a ball that they've played with, like dinosaurs that they've worked with, and it's connecting that understanding of an object to now a letter and a sound. And I think that that's where we've seen the most success, is it is a progression of development. And I think that that's why we are having success with this program, is it's taking what they know, what they've played with, what they've used, and then putting a skill with it.
And they have the visuals to reference as you move on. Great.
Especially since the concept of the letter sound is abstract, right? It's
Super abstract. Yep.
Sure. Great.
So then this one is the same thing, but these are the dual kids with their English sounds.
So it looks like there was only a difference of 2 students, right?
And we have 2 more students than they do, probably, right?
Sure, right. So it looks like it's pretty much exactly the same. Coming from a dual language perspective, both Colleen and Elva, does this tell us anything different about the students that you're servicing?
No, I think it's pretty consistent with what we had last year. So our kids, the only thing that I see different is that sometimes they kind of like mix in their sounds. For example, I know that Heather has a girl that basically mostly speaks Spanish, and she tends to say what she knows in Spanish, even though that is not really the letter that what we wanted to say, but that's how she knows it. So they use the information that they have, to participate in the group classes when we're practicing letters. But I think it's basically they start the same way, and they, at the end of the day, at the end of the year, they usually can figure it out for the most part. There's always like a few kids that struggle, especially when it comes to the vowels. They kind of tend to say it in Spanish instead of English, but it's just practice. They need more practice, and a lot of times when we have parents at home that participate with their training and practice at home and review at home, those kids tend to progress a little faster.
Great. So it sounds like the letter recognition is not the concern, right? Because the letters look essentially the same
Yes.
in Spanish. So they're looking at it like, that is the letter C, but I'm giving you the sound of how we say the letter C in Spanish versus how we say it in English. Okay.
So what it actually shows me, and especially since I was the assessor, so I was able to see, it's the exact same kids who displayed on this graph, and that's why the numbers are the same, because the kids weren't necessarily able, they're first coming in, I'd be like, tell me the sounds in Spanish, and they don't quite know Spanish, English, and so they're getting the sounds that are the same in both languages, so it tells you that those kids are ready to be instructed on just those sounds that are different, whereas the rest of them are starting from the bottom, we don't listen to them either.
Great. I think it's also important for us to note that with 50% in monolingual and in dual, language doesn't matter, yes, however, it's the same concern, right? And this is not all special education children either, right? So it's not all about there's a learning disability that's preventing these children from being able to say the sound. Great. Thank you.
So, there's the Spanish sounds, and 20 kids had 0 letter sounds, and kind of what I was touching on before, sometimes when I, ask them the sounds in Spanish, a kid who might know them in English would say, I don't know Spanish, but really, they just need to be told, it's the same in English and Spanish, and so some kids didn't know that, and some kids were just telling me the English letter sounds, and I said, you know, in Spanish. So we have a few more showing 0, 8, 1 to 5, and 4 kids, 11 to 15. So you see that overall, it's a little, but again, there are some sounds that differ, right?
Yes.
What you were saying.
But
That's
see,
typical.
So we need to make sure that that's the focus of the instruction, the vowels and those different letters.
so it makes me think, because of what you just said, the program that we've been using, that ABC Bootcamp, does have the letters that are different in Spanish. I would be curious if, after the instruction was done using all of the sound, all the 26 sounds, if those students in dual continued on with the letters that are different, just in Spanish, if that would help them kind of make that bridge, or if it would be beneficial or not. We've never done it. I just, after you said that, I was like, I wonder if that would actually bridge it way better.
That's like the meta linguistic part of it. It's like, and especially when you are instructing in the English part. Oh, in Spanish it makes the same
It's
sound.
like that
So you
cognitive.
clarify that, but then I think that's a great point. That you extend it and go on and say, look, remember we learned that this is in English. And in Spanish it's avión,
I wonder if we should
Well,
look at that with our roadmap.
I didn't even know they have that in that program.
Yeah, it's in
But,
there.
but I do, when I do teach them the letter, I always say, so after I finish in Spanish, so how do you say it in English? And then, what's the sound in English? And they realize, oh, look, it's the same, and so I make a point of telling them when it's the same, that is the same. But they don't know that when they come in. They just feel it's a different language, and especially some of them don't know the language. Half of them are English speakers. They're like, oh, well, I don't know Spanish. So they just assume it's different. But once they make that connection, they will be able to.
Yeah, so it's really important to explicitly teach and reinforce that, the similarities, and then, oh, look, this is different. Remember, we're reading this one, and say it differently.
I wonder now, in the past, you taught English and Spanish all day. So and I know we kind of talked about it, Liz, you said they don't really turn it off. It's just, when they come to me, it's only English. So I'm wondering if it'll be more clear to them that, oh, it's Spanish, because they're only doing Spanish with you and you're saying the sounds. If they're able to distinguish it differently, I don't know. I'm curious
Good
to
question.
see, right?
Yeah.
If what happens this year, because it's two different classrooms, two different teachers, only English in my room, only Spanish.
It's an interesting point. It's
Right?
really like what the brain research shows is that like the bilingual brain is what they call it. It's always going back and forth between the languages to use whatever resource it has in which language to mean something or think of something. So even like you might be thinking in your head in Spanish, but you're going to speak in English. It's like the way they describe it. It's like English one. It's not
Yeah.
just black and white.
So I'm so curious.
I am also curious, it looks like we have about the same number of children, a little more in this kindergarten dual graph that we're looking at, that we're not able to identify any letter sounds. Was there any sort of similarity? Is it the same letters that they cannot, like, I know for this it's 0, but looking at some of the other children where it was 1 to 5 letter sound, like, are there typical sounds that they can get and typical sounds that they can't? Or are there any catch-22s? Like, maybe no one in kindergarten can identify the letter Q, the sound of the letter Q.
That actually is.
Yeah.
That's one
I
of the
thought
last
that
ones
might
to
be one of the
develop.
ones, yeah.
Sometimes the first letter in their name.
Yes.
Okay.
They're actually, there's a progression and the easiest ones to the hardest ones. So when you're even learning them, you start with the easiest ones. Like, they're already,
Yep.
they could do that easily, but then, maybe Q, it's
Yes.
gonna be hard, because it looks like a P or,
Mhm.
it's different. So, yeah, it is a progression, and the easiest ones, they can pick them up easily, and then it gets harder at the end.
Understood. Thank you.
Just when we were assessing them, it was cute, but I think they heard we wanted to hear sounds, and we would hear farm animal sounds. And we would go quack, and we would hear animal sounds, I think they were
awesome.
trying, they're like, we
Yeah,
want
they
sounds.
connect
I
sounds.
just
Yeah,
don't
there's
think
some
they
sort of
have the
connection.
background knowledge, like, this is a letter and it's gonna make a sound, it hasn't been instructed to them yet. So they're giving us their A game, but.
That's
So I think
amazing.
they're on the right track.
I
They
didn't
just
know.
really, they know what a
That's
sound
great.
is, they just don't know to apply it to the letter and stuff.
Yeah.
All of a sudden they're like,
Right.
A different animal, like it's a different letter, I should
Sure.
sound with a different sound, we were seeing that,
That's great.
yeah, first year.
There's always a first, yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely great. I love it.
Okay, before we move on to math, we've kind of talked already about the first and second question. The third question was, progress monitoring. So what tools you're planning on using and the frequency of progress monitoring, if maybe we can steer the conversation there. And then finally, we do have some outliers, so those kids who have their letters and sounds, do we have a grade level plan in place to keep moving them forward as well?
Well, looking at your last question, we were actually really thoughtful this year when we looked at our screening data. We had 2 students that were in monolingual, and we purposefully put them in Candace's class together. And we did that with a purpose so that once we started guided reading, there was really that built-in partner that even though they are at different academic levels now that we've seen their instructional level, it's still having that partner that you feel like you could do some higher tiered instruction where if your entire class is starting at a AA, reading for meaning is where these kids are at this point, that we did that. And we had not done that in the past, and I'm really glad that we were very thoughtful with that, with placement.
But it helped to have that feedback from the pre-K teachers also too. They knew where the kids were, and then they were able to share with us.
And then just our progress monitoring tool?
So we are going to continue on the kindergarten level using that Diamond Lake progress monitoring. We loved that. I think that we are looking at starting that once guided reading begins, and at that point we'll be done with our little boot camp so that it kind of will show whether it worked. And that was the big conversation that we had last year is at our second data meeting, we had that done. And it was fun to kind of see now that this instruction has taken place, who did it work for, who didn't it work for, and where can we go from there?
Will you start with like letter sounds before
Yes,
you
yes,
do the process.
yes.
I mean, I figured
Yes.
as much.
Yeah. We're gonna jump to blends.
Right.
I do have to say, I'm really excited that our intervention team, we met yesterday and we made groups already of the kids that are really standing out. And I'm really curious to see, you know, how those kids progress having double, you know, they're getting double, some of them are getting triple. One, you know, in small groups. So I think that's gonna be huge too. So I'll
How
be
many
excited
students
to
do we
see.
have in kindergarten to receive intervention? 8. Okay.
It's more like support.
Yeah,
Support,
yeah, it's
I'm sorry.
Small group
Right, I know
support
it's
is-
not, I take that out. It's
Yeah,
not,
no, I just wanted
full
to make sure
intervention,
because
yes.
of all the red,
First,
it's
yes.
kind of just
exactly.
help for them too.
So are there specific students that we're sort of targeting with help and support, or it's really just to push in and help and support?
Yes, and I misspoke, it's about 4 students, 3 to 4 students in each class.
I see,
Yeah.
okay, great. Great, wonderful.
Okay, are we gonna move on to now?
So here you guys can see that, it's broken down into percentage by what they could count to, so 0 to 10, you can see 16 students could only count up to 10. And then you can see the progression going from 19, 25, and so on. And have some outliers there that can count past 100 already.
Amazing.
Which was, yeah, it was awesome. So I think, what are your thoughts on that? I know when I was assessing them, they get caught like 12, 13, 15,
Teens.
or 14, 16.
Teens are tough.
They miss
Vicky
that.
Riley, would you like to share your thought on teens?
They're always missing that one teen number, and then they get to 20, and they can usually go on from there.
Yeah.
But it's getting them to go back and make sure they get all of those teens in there.
Teens are tough.
I felt like our numbers in counting were a little bit lower than we had seen in the past.
Okay.
When we were looking at last year's data, I thought that we had more students that were kind of at that pinnacle, like at that 100 mark than we had had in the past. But I would say, I actually think that we have fewer students in the 0 to 10.
Yes.
So I
Yeah.
think that, just like you were talking about, here we are with less middle ground. We don't really have that middle ground, but it's slowly moving into that middle ground, but it's those teen numbers that are just.
I'll take the more kids knowing, like, starting at 5
Yeah.
than the one starting at 0, you know what I mean?
Yes.
It's yeah, you take the good and the bad, I guess, yeah.
But there was just a very, like 3 or 4 that when I said, can you count for me, they didn't know what that meant.
So why do you think it is though that we have fewer children in this, it looks like only 25% of the grade level in this 0 to 10. Why do you think we have fewer kids starting at the very base in comparison to what we have with letter sounds?
Counting's easy. You can do it with your kids. Oh, count out 5, you know, candy bars, or count out, you know what I mean? You're at home. Think of all the counting you did when they're little.
It's an
You know?
oral way
Yeah.
to teach. You're not, it's not visual, you can count when
That's for age
you're walking
too.
to the
Yeah.
car.
Count how old you are.
Sure.
Countless steps or.
Yeah.
Do we also think our children, would it be about the same with the counting if they were to see a visual? Do you think they can identify numbers yet?
We did that. We have that data.
Oh, I'm sorry. Jumping ahead.
Just
That's
wait.
right. I'm
There's
sorry.
more.
I apologize. I'm excited for number ID.
There it is. So 12, yeah, 12 students can only identify from 1 to 5.
Counting is more almost like a song, like a melody, it can be
Yeah.
memorized, and
Sure.
just like you sing, they can probably sing the ABCs easier than they can tell you the sounds that they make. And it's same with, and element of P is 1 letter.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, when it comes to identification, that's where you're getting additional knowledge of, they understand what that number is.
Yeah.
And that's when we do the counting, sometimes it helps to have the conceptual, you know, things that, to weed out, is it just a memorization of the song,
Right.
or are they actually counting?
Is this typical for number ID?
I would say so.
Typical trends?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So based on all of that data, I looked at students that were either not counting yet or had very low number ID, 5 and below. And those are the students I'm gonna help support for kindergarten
Right.
And those will be kind of flexible those time.
Awesome. And how about those 20 that can already go 21 through 26?
I think we need to, I think that number is a little high.
Yeah.
I think that's higher than typical. Yes. So we need to, make sure that they don't get missed, and we need to target those kids also.
Mhm.
As, so.
But I think what we see a lot of times with those kids is that there's not always the connection of one-to-one to the number. The number is a concrete skill, and the one-to-one is where it actually develops a little bit more, and that's what we need to see is if they have that before we talk about moving them to that next. Because I think if we were to weed secondary on that one and actually having them count, I think you would see a dramatic shift in that.
So the number sense.
The number sets, yeah. Because our one-to-one, because everything is very screened, it's different. It's very different than it's been in years past.
And just the brain development,
Yeah.
just like that
Yeah.
abstract.
Yeah.
Is it harder for you to strengthen them? Do you do?
We have them count out objects. Yeah, yeah. And so we only had them count out 10 objects. But we had a lot of students that made some great little buildings. But weren't quite ready to actually take one for.
But we do also show them like 5 random numbers, 0 to 10 as well, to see, we figure, okay, if we did it in order, we try to mix it up and think of like 8, 3, see if they recognize those numbers as well.
So looking at this data with our counting and our number ID, we also have to remember we have taken on a brand new math program and curriculum model for math this year. How do we feel this data is going to impact what we see in that new program? Because we had a conversation last week about what that testing has felt like in the new program, and we've all agreed it's been lengthy and it's been hard, and some of the styles of the questions are very different than what we've used in our past programming. So how do you feel this is going to help, hinder, match, whatever words you want to use, with our new program?
Well, we started our topic 1 on Monday, and right now we're only up to identifying number 3. We moved up to 3, and we're moving then into identifying number 4. We're actually talking a lot about using counters, using symbols showing the number with a picture, and understanding that the symbol 5 is also 5 counters, or can be drawn with 5 stars. So I think all of that taught at the same time, show us, yesterday he put 2 stars in the clouds. How else could he show 2? He could draw whatever picture they wanted. So it's allowing them to learn the symbol, learn how to write the symbol, but also understand that the number can be shown using objects.
One of my students actually, you're gonna love this moment, ready? Hold on. So one of my kids, because on the guided practice page, it's 1 and you write the number 1, and then it's 2 and you write the number 2. And one of my kids was like, wait, so I'm gonna count 1 and write 1, and then I'm gonna say 1, 2, and write a 2, and I was like, yeah, you are. And it was that moment where they actually made the actual connection to what they were counting, that it comes in order, 1, 2, and then we write a 2, and then for 3, hold on to your horses. We said 1, 2, and he's like, that is gonna be 3, and I was like, yes it is. But then writing it was a little much for us, but the concept I think was really good, and I think that that's where sometimes we have to look at getting them the concept of saying that they have to write it is much more important than making sure it looks exactly like 3. And I think that that's one thing that a seasoned teacher like we have on this, that we know that that's not where our focus is, but I could see it being a struggle for new teachers because they're like, well, I have to write a 3, but we understand that that's gonna come. It's just getting them to make the connection between the numeral and everything.
Okay. How about the fact that our new math program is pretty language and vocabulary heavy? How has that been going so far?
We haven't seen that yet, I would say, for the
Okay.
most part, because we are really at the lowest level.
Okay.
That we haven't seen.
Okay.
There's a lot of questioning words. I don't know if
Yeah.
you guys
Higher
have
level.
noticed that. So there's been, I've had to break down like, how did you? They're so used to telling me the answer and not the how did you, that we had to have a conversation of like, what that means. And even though that sounds like very basic vocabulary, that would be the only vocabulary that I would say that we're working on right now.
It's
Okay.
hard for them to think, I don't want to know the answer. I want to know how you got the answer. It's
Yes.
like really hard. I mean,
It's a
even as an
process.
adult, I'm like,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
5 because it's 5, you know.
Yes.
So that's hard for them to wrap their heads around at this point. But some of them are starting to get it.
Okay. Great. Love it. How about from the English as a second language lens?
Well, we had all spoken about like the certain students that we're gonna be working with,
Mhm.
and, I didn't really have any.
Oh, that's okay. You don't need a slide. I just your feedback. That's all.
Well, we had spoken about, I had, a document that I shared with everyone on where each student was. And, we had several students who were just coming in as beginners and
Yeah.
level 1, some in between. So that's how we broke down how, like, who's gonna see what students. And I think we're gonna give most of the attention to the students who are still in before.
Sure. And it's still, I know even, I was in a meeting yesterday with our dual language team, Elva was there, and it's still that common trend of what we're seeing with English as a second language. The writing is so incredibly tough. I mean, the access test is not easy in any way, shape, or form, and what they're assessing, and everyone pretty much gave the same feedback. That writing is so hard. We're seeing better scores in the listening and speaking pieces, even at a kindergarten level in comparison. Even if they're not exiting, that's still where you're seeing the higher score. But the reading is tough and the writing is, ooh, baby. It is
Yeah.
hard.
Some of our
It is hard what they're
juniors
looking for.
Even like listening and speaking was really
Yeah.
Yeah.
helpful. So we had a lot of students. I think it was about
We have probably our highest percentage of ELs that we've had in quite a
Mhm.
while when we went through screening that we noticed.
All right, so looking at all this data, kindergarten, how do you feel? Do you feel like you're in a good place? We've got the stuff we need. Are there extra resources? Are there different strategies? Is there something else we need to sort of explore based on this beginning benchmark?
The big thing I would say on the kindergarten level that we've had many conversations is the fine motor piece to all of this. And that I think is one thing that we are working actually with our intervention team, is that when they're doing some of their push-in, they're actually gonna help us with, it sounds very minimal, but that concept of their name. And
Yeah.
getting them to connect the letters in their name to writing their name, because that one little fine motor piece is not there this time.
Okay.
We're gonna be working on like building strength with some Play-Doh and doing all those little fine motor activities. But I would say the last few years, that's been our big thing that we've seen gaps in, that we have to continue to attack.
Okay.
I would say this is the year I've had the most students unable to write their name and having trouble, like we'll do the highlighter, trace it, and that's really hard for them even to write over, you know, what we write
Do the
for.
majority know how to spell it?
No.
No. So it's they don't know how to spell it
Yeah.
and they don't know how to write
Some
it.
do not,
Identify.
Find it,
Identify?
yeah.
Okay.
I would say I have more students that can't identify it than I've had in quite
Yeah.
a long time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Having difficulties also with even gripping the pens. Yeah, I don't know if it had to do with them, doing COVID, being home and not,
Sure.
not going to school and practicing
Yep.
the skills, but, yeah, a lot of kids don't even know how the pens are correct.
Yeah.
So it's even stuff like that we have to start with.
And that,
But the one thing that I really appreciate is that the intervention team is gonna start with us immediately. Normally, they usually start after, we start reading groups, and so they're starting right away with this data and practicing with those kids that are beginners,
Great.
really struggling.
Good.
We share the routines for anybody to like class routines, like any.
You know, I I can talk to Robin about it and see if there, you know, even if it was like a once a week happen kind of strategy, but I can certainly check with her and see if OT can tap into to be able to support learning how to hold a pencil and all that.
And a
kind
lot
of
of it's just exposure. They've
Sure.
never
Yeah,
used it
sure.
before, and so it's new. And just like cutting scissors, yikes. The beginning of kindergarten with
Yes.
scissors is a scary
Yeah.
thing, but now that we're cutting every day, like with our ABC boot camp, now they're
Yep.
getting that exposure, and it's amazing how far they've
Yeah.
come with that.
And I know Courtney, our art teacher, has been working, she has it hanging in the hallway. She's been working with kids a lot about tracing all sorts of different lines, like doing a zigzag, being able to do it in circles, being able to do the castle where it looks like squares and all that kind of stuff. And when I was in that hallway this morning, she was telling me there's some first and second graders who are still, it's hard, you know, and she said, I don't mind if the point is not for them to perfectly stay on the line, it's to be able to produce that shape within the line. And some are, it's tough. They're having a really hard time. So continued fine motor skills, and I definitely think, you know, this is a very digital life for a lot of our little loves, and they did have a lot of learning happening online through COVID and all those kinds of things, and now it's time to get back to good old fashioned pencil.
Yeah, old
And I think that that's something our team is just really, that if you're talking about a need, that is something that our team continually goes back to, is just a need for something to help us transfer from that fine motor, from the building that development,
Mhm.
because I think we're all kind of pulling from different places, and if we had a consistent baseline that
Sure.
we felt.
Sure. Any other closing thoughts from the coaches? Now that you've seen the data and you've been coaching our staff on some different strategies, of course our new program, of course last year we had all sorts of different things on a ring and all that good stuff, and it was really exciting. Anything you would like to add?
I'm just excited to see how it progresses with the kind of different layout and revision of the idea of concrete, pictorial, abstract in the build, and see how it goes with some of these kiddos that are in the 0 to something range.
Sure.
For me, last year, you guys reflected so much about what the kids needed that were in front of you in that moment, and then through progress monitoring, honed in on those specific things that I'm excited to see, like, with that background knowledge of last year and trying those different interventions, if the progress of our students will be faster, even faster this year.
Any other closing thoughts on kindergarten from intervention? Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much to the intervention team for putting this together, all the work that you've done, scooping through every last little diamond here in the building. It's been great, and I know I was with you guys on Monday, and I know you went through a lot of different processes to determine, you know, who needs intervention services, who needs in class, who needs push-in, who needs pull-out, all that kind of stuff. So I thank you immensely for how meticulous you were looking at every single student, because I think that's how we identify really what is the greatest need. Because we do have some children here, let's be honest, the scores, they're just low straight across the board. And we can't have them pulled out, you know, a half hour for ELA, a half hour for Spanish, a half hour for, I mean, they're just missing a ton of classroom instruction that we know they need. So I appreciate the process that you went through to prioritize the greatest needs and the services that they need, and everything that you're gonna be doing to progress monitor them, so that we can celebrate and have a popsicle party when they graduate from you or exit, whatever word we wanna use. That's always a lot of fun, so I thank you for all of that. And I thank you guys for a wonderful data meeting today.
Can I say, I loved the tables that you guys did, just because, like, we tend to focus on our classroom. Is that Lizzie who did that?
Lizzie
Can I tell you, because you think about it, we focus on our own numbers. And you look at your, you know, I'm looking at my friends and seeing where they're at. But seeing it this way and then being able to compare, you know, the English to the dual, and then just from last year and thinking of this year, it was just a lot easier to kind of see it and to kind of compare the data. Wow, you know, there's one kid here, and, you know, so it was just a lot easier to look at and understand. So Lizzie, thank you so much for doing that. It was good visual.
Yeah, I thought it was, I just think it's really neat just to see, just all that red in the beginning of the
Yeah.
year. It's like, these kids really, all these kids, 0 letter sums. Like, and animal names, but then when you look at the end of the year, it's like, this is the work that all you guys have done. That's what's so cool. It's like you are teaching them everything that they are gonna know by the end of this year, and it's a lot.
Mhm.
So props to you guys.
Props to everybody here in this room.
Yay.
You all do amazing work with our kids. That's why we see so much growth. And it makes me so proud to work with all of you because you do such amazing work with our kids. So looking ahead at what we have here, we have our next data meeting coming up on the week of October 9th, so off the top of my head, October 12th, I believe it is. And that's where we're gonna look at some classroom progress monitoring data. So we're gonna have a couple of weeks in between to kind of see all the different things you've been doing, how has that impacted student performance. And then we have another one on November 6th. And then we have the big one to take a look at the winter benchmark the week of December 18th. So we've got two little in-between progress monitoring pods of data, and then we're gonna have that big benchmark where we're gonna see that 100% of our students in both ELA and math have shown growth, because that was a priority that we set as a district and a goal. And we changed it a little bit this year because we wanted to be mindful of the fact that it might not be that 100% of our students get to tier 1, but that 100% of our students are showing growth, because we always have to be mindful and equitable of the fact that not all students learn and grow at the same rate, right? They may show a smaller percentile from fall to winter than they do in comparison from winter to spring. Or sometimes we see fall to winter, it's this ginormous growth, and then fall to winter, is that what it is? Yes. Fall to winter, there's a huge jump because they haven't even been exposed to it at the start of the year, and now they've had all this exposure. And then winter to spring, we might see a little bit of a smaller growth margin because now it's the exposure piece is over. Now I need you to understand, I need you to know the process, all those kinds of things, and it gets a little bit more complicated. So those are the differences that we have with that goal, but I am confident every single child in kindergarten will be showing this growth with the work of all of you. So thank you so much. Have a wonderful 3-day weekend. I know, all right? Everybody always needs a 3-day weekend. And thank you.